Next up, Mr. Weir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank you and all members of this committee for giving independent MPs an opportunity to participate in today's meeting. One of the things I've really appreciated about being an independent MP is the opportunity to take a more dispassionate look at issues, and that's what I've tried to do in all the committee hearings on SNC Lavalin. So I'd like to say a few words about my reading of the Ethics Commissioner's report and some of the topics that I think might be worth pursuing if this committee decides to hear from the Ethics Commissioner and perhaps other witnesses. The Commissioner's key conclusion is that there was a violation of Section 9 of the Conflict of Interest Act, which says that public office holders should not, and I quote, seek to influence a decision of another person so as to further the public office holder's private interests or those of the public office holder's relatives or friends, or to improperly further another person's private interests. Now, I don't think anyone is alleging that the Prime Minister sought to further the private interests of his family, his friends, or himself. I also don't think there's any doubt that many, if not most, public policy decisions will either further or detract from the private interests of various companies and individuals. So the key conclusion from the Ethics Commissioner is that the Prime Minister improperly tried to further another person's private interests. And of course, that finding hinges critically on an interpretation of what is improper. So I think it would be well worth this committee's time to dig into that with the Ethics Commissioner. We've heard a lot about findings of fact, but really this conclusion comes down to an interpretation of one word in the Conflict of Interest Act, which is something that I think could be open to challenge and certainly could be open to further exploration. So, Mr. Chair, it's a little bit unclear to me whether the Ethics Commissioner believes the Prime Minister is guilty of any kind of conflict of interest in the classic definition of that term. It does seem clear that the Ethics Commissioner believes that the Prime Minister is guilty of improperly furthering another person's private interests, but there's already been some debate about how that language should be interpreted, what's improper, and I would suggest that as an appropriate focus for this committee's work.
Mr. Weir.
Thanks very much. Since we seem to have entered a bit of a broader discussion of the SNC Lavalin case, I just want to make the point that I think it would have been far preferable had there been a more robust investigation and prosecution of the specific executives involved in alleged wrongdoing, rather than being left in this scenario of prosecuting the company as a whole, which inevitably will have negative consequences for people who had no involvement at all in the wrongdoing. I mean, whether or not members of the committee believe the figure of 9,000 jobs, I don't think anyone would dispute that going after the company as a whole is going to have negative consequences for a lot of people who are totally blameless in this thing. So I do think one of the key takeaways from the SNC Lavalin controversy is that we should have much more effective prosecution of the individual corporate executives who are involved in wrongdoing, rather than relying on this kind of legal fiction of corporate personhood to prosecute whole enterprises. Thank you.